Hi, and welcome to Hoffman's Hot Seat. I'm Tom Hoffman with One-to-One Media, coming to you from the inContact ICUC 2012 conference here in Salt Lake City. And I'm joined today by Mariann McDonagh, CMO for inContact. And today, Mariann and I will be talking about different ways that companies can try to brand customer service. Mariann, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be back in the hot seat again, Tom.
It's great to have you here. So, and we're live and in person, right?
Live and in person.
So, Mariann, one of the things I wanted to talk about is that it seems that in today's global market, it's become more and more difficult for companies to distinguish themselves by price or by product. And customer service seems to become a real differentiator. And I'm wondering, what are some ways that companies can go about making customer service a differentiator?
So the first thing that I want to say is, we use a lot of quotes from Peppers and Rogers, and, we talk about service really becoming the next and only bastion of competitive differentiation in today's world because of all the commoditization around products. So really it's key that that your service is something that's exceptional and extraordinary and brands you. I just came from a session with Dr. Joseph Michelli, who's the author of the Starbucks Experience and the Zappos Experience. And he brought people through a workshop around creating a way to serve statement. And what I thought was so cool about that was it really took these service professionals to a different place in thinking about what they want to represent about their brand through the way that they serve. So really sort of turning it on its head and then breaking it down and saying, what are customers experiencing now and how do they feel? And then what do we want the end state to be, and how do we get there in the meantime? And what I thought was really interesting is there's been a lot of discussion about feelings and emotion, which typically we don't hear in that kind of service conversation. It's more metrics and measurement. Right. So I think that the idea of the brand really becomes the power of how people relate and connect to what you do, and how that translates into that way you serve statement or your unique service value proposition. So the deliver happiness for Zappos, right, which reflects who they are so much, but it also reflects who they want to be in the eyes of their customers. And I think that that's really the key thing.
Those are great points. And a lot of companies would love to be able to get to that end state where Zappos is now and be able to brand customer service. But can you offer some pointers on how companies can go about trying to structure this or develop it from a process standpoint?
Well, exactly. It's interesting because I think it would have been completely irrelevant to bring Joe Michelli in to talk to a bunch of mid-market customers and say, we want to be Zappos tomorrow, right? That's not going to happen. Everybody's on a journey, and it's just really where you are. But I think what was so interesting, again, about that approach was it's the intentionality. It's taking the moment out of time to take people off the floor, off the phones, bring them into a quiet place and say, who are we and who do we want to be? And then how do we reflect that in the metrics? What are the drivers that get us there? And I think so much we focus on the metrics and not on the who we want to be and how we get there. And I think that that's the way to start, right? Is to say, all right, here's our aspiration, and let's at least focus on one or two things that help us to get there. So if our aspiration is to deliver happiness, what are two things that we may be able to do in the next 6 to 9 months, drive into our service process that helps us to move closer to that, way we serve nirvana that reflects the brand.
Right. So a building block approach, if you will.
Exactly.
And learn from, if you want to refer to them as pilots, or learn from those examples and then build on that.
Absolutely. And the key, we've had this conversation many times, you and I, but it's about listening to customers, right? So it's about using the customer insight, using the data, listening to calls, talking to the agents who are on the phone. What are customers saying about your brand? Because chances are, if it's great, you want to make sure you incorporate that into your branded service. And if it's not, that should really be your signpost, right? And where you need to go. And you can learn a lot about the things that they say about their experience. Because at the end of the day, what's fascinating about being in the service business now is brands are no longer defined by people like me who market for a living. They're defined by the customers that interact with them. And that's why it's really so critical.
Can you also talk a little bit about companies, we're talking about Zappos, other companies that you feel do an exceptional job of branding customer service and what it is that they're bringing to the table?
That's a really good one. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, one that always pops up and Martha talks about a lot is USAA, right?
Sure.
I mean, these guys have this, phenomenal passed down from generation to generation to generation. For me, it's about the brands that I'm loyal to. Allstate is a biggie for me personally because I've had a couple of times that I needed them. They've grown with me as I moved and bought houses and have a teenager driving, right? All those things that become more important. So the idea that they're a brand that I've had with me for, 35 years in my adult life and I think I'll take with me to, the next stage is really key. So for me, it's about that emotional component. The experience of doing business with them has been satisfying for me, and that's why I have continued loyalty to them.
Okay. So, what works for a company like Zappos might not work for an Allstate or some other type of company.
Right.
So I'm wondering if there are pointers that you can offer in terms of maybe drawing upon customer feedback to learn what matters most from them and try to incorporate that into brand and customer service.
Yeah, it's really interesting because they don't measure things like talk time at all in Zappos. It's not an issue. We just heard they had some 16-hour phone calls where agents were putting down headsets and getting crazy stuff, right?
Yeah.
And most contact centers that we deal with every day could never operate like that and be profitable. But what I think is really compelling about all these stories when you stitch them together is that really the brand becomes an outward-facing reflection of the culture. And it's about talking to the people that are in your business today about what they care about, what they see, what they hear, and really using them as the agents of change, if you will, no pun intended, to be able to reflect the culture out to become the brand and vice versa. I think that that's sort of one of those building blocks too, is really engaging the workforce in this process. And we talked a little earlier today about the whole Gen Y thing, right? They want to change the world. So how better to engage them in your business by asking them to help to reflect the culture and define the brand that you want to create with your customers.
Those are great points. And if you're trying to drive that type of culture, you have to also identify what changes you might need to make to try to get to that point.
Absolutely. I think the intellectual honesty thing is really important, right? And that's where the customer feedback and employee feedback comes in. What are we not doing well? I mean, even the most perfect business and the most storied brands are going to fall down and make mistakes. That's why the trust thing, right? We've talked about that before,
Sure.
is so key, because trust gives you that sort of rainy day coverage from when you screw up, because every brand screws up and missteps. But the question is, how much loyalty have I built over time? How proactive have they been with me? How intentional? Because it gives me much more, much more leeway to forgive them and to move on because we have that trusted relationship.
Sure. And there's more of a willingness there to do so.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, Mariann, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Thanks.